Brenna Whitlock walked into the marketing firm on a Monday morning wearing her best pressed blouse, carrying her onboarding folder, and telling herself this was her second chance. She was 48 years old. She had spent 2 years unable to find work. She had been asked to leave 3 charity boards, dropped by her closest friends, and gently pushed out of the job she had held for 12 years. Her husband barely spoke to her at breakfast anymore. This internship at one of the top marketing firms in the city was the first door that had opened for her in a very long time. She was going to walk through it with her head up. The receptionist smiled and told her the executive would be in shortly to greet the new career pivot interns. Brenna sat down in the glass conference room with the 4 other interns and folded her hands in her lap. She looked out at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling window. She let herself breathe for the first time in months. Then the door opened. A woman walked in wearing a tailored charcoal suit. Tall, composed, warm brown eyes, long dark hair pulled back neatly. She carried a leather folder in one hand and a small white ceramic coffee cup in the other. She walked to the head of the conference table with the calm of someone who had walked into rooms like this 1,000 times. She set the coffee cup down. She set the folder down. She sat behind the desk. She looked directly at Brenna Whitlock, and she smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a triumphant one, just a small, quiet, unmistakable smile. The kind of smile a person gives when the universe has just handed them something they never asked for, but always deserved. Brenna's face began to drain of color, because she recognized this woman. She recognized the eyes. She recognized the calm. She recognized the woman standing behind the espresso bar of a cafe in Dallas 3 years ago, wearing an apron soaked in latte foam, saying nothing while Brenna screamed at her and filmed her and swore to destroy her life. The executive slid the small white coffee cup across the polished desk toward Brenna. She spoke in a voice that was calm, measured, and completely unhurried. She said,
I hope you
like the coffee here. I made it myself for years. But to understand the exact weight of that sentence, and to understand how the barista Brenna Whitlock tried to ruin ended up sitting behind the desk that would decide her future, we have to go back 3 years. Back to a cafe in downtown Dallas. Back to a Tuesday morning. Back to a cup of coffee, a video, and a mistake Brenna Whitlock did not know she was making. Her name was Mae Tatum. She was 29 years old, born and raised on the Tatum family cattle ranch outside Prairie View, Texas. Her people had worked that land since her great-great-grandfather, a freed homesteader named Ezekiel Tatum, claimed his acres of Texas prairie in 1885. 5 generations of the Tatum family had raised cattle, mended fences, buried their dead beneath the same live oak tree, and lived by a code that her grandmother Othelia recited every Sunday morning. You outwork everyone. You keep your word. You do not humiliate a single soul, no matter what they do to you. And you never, ever let the world see you break. Everly grew up carrying that code the way other kids carry backpacks. She earned her undergraduate degree at the University of Texas. She worked her way up, and at 29, she was halfway through an evening MBA program at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, working 2 jobs to pay for it, because the Tatum family did not believe in debt they could not carry. One of those jobs was the 6 a.m. shift at an upscale cafe in the Arts District of downtown Dallas. The kind of place where a small coffee costs $7 and the clientele wore watches worth more than most people's cars. That was where she met Brenna Whitlock. Brenna was 45 then. She was married to a commercial real estate developer named Preston Whitlock. She sat on the boards of 3 charities. She wore designer coats even in July. She came into the cafe every weekday morning at 7:15 sharp and ordered the same drink. An oat milk latte, extra hot, 2 pumps of vanilla, 1 shot decaf, 1 shot regular, in a specific cup she preferred. Everly had made that drink for her over 300 times without a single complaint. But on a Tuesday morning in April, the cafe's espresso machine had been recalibrated overnight. The temperature ran 2 degrees cooler than usual. Brenna took 1 sip of her latte, walked back to the counter, and slid the cup across it hard enough to slosh foam onto the wood. She said, loud enough for every customer in the cafe to hear, "This is cold. Are you actually trying to poison me? Or are you just too stupid to steam milk properly?" Everly looked at her with the calm her grandmother had spent decades teaching her. She said, "I am so sorry, ma'am. I will remake it right now on the house." But Brenna was not looking for an apology. She was looking for a stage. She pulled out her phone. She turned the camera on. She held it up to Everly's face. And what happened next was the moment that changed both of their lives. Before we go back to that morning in the cafe, take a moment and tell us in the comments what town or city you're watching from today. And if you believe that every action carries a consequence, hit that subscribe button and join our community before the next case opens. Brenna started screaming. She screamed that Everly was worthless. She screamed that Everly did not belong in a place like this. She screamed that she was going to make sure Everly never worked in Dallas again. She threw the latte across the counter. It splattered across Everly's apron, her shirt, her chin. She kept filming. She kept yelling. Everly did not raise her voice. She did not roll her eyes. She did not say a single word that her grandmother would have been ashamed of. She calmly picked up a clean towel, wiped her face, looked directly into the camera lens, and said, "Ma'am, I am so sorry your morning has been difficult. I hope the rest of your day is better than it started." Then she walked to the back of the cafe to change her apron. Brenna posted the video to her social media accounts within the hour. She captioned it, "This is the kind of employee-ruining service in America. Share this until she loses her job." And here is the part that Brenna Whitlock had not calculated. The internet watched the whole video. They watched Everly get screamed at. They watched the latte hit her chest. They watched her stay perfectly composed. And they made a decision that Brenna had not seen coming. They took Everly's side. The video went viral, but not the way Brenna intended. Within 3 days, it had over 40 million views. News outlets picked it up. Talk shows discussed it. People online tracked down Brenna's name, her husband's business, the charity she served on, and the country club where she lunched every Thursday. The story became a national conversation about entitlement, about grace, about the difference between the person who screams and the person who holds still. Everly Mae Tatum, the composed young black barista from Dallas, became a symbol overnight. She turned down every interview request. She turned down a book deal. She turned down 2 morning show appearances. When one reporter finally caught her outside her apartment building, she simply said, "I appreciate the kindness, but I have a shift and a night class. I have to go." She went back to work. She finished her MBA. She kept her head down. And within 18 months, she was quietly hired by a top-tier marketing firm in Dallas run by a man named Declan Voss. Declan did not hire her because of the video. He hired her because her portfolio was the strongest applicant packet he had seen in 5 years. But he also remembered the video. And he remembered thinking, at the time, that whoever raised that young woman had raised her right. For Brenna Whitlock, the following 2 years were a slow, quiet unraveling. She lost her seat on the first charity board within a month. The chairwoman called her personally and said, "Brenna, we cannot be associated with this." She lost the second seat a week later. The third resigned her by email. Her friends stopped returning her calls. The country club she had lunched at every Thursday for 11 years suddenly had no available tables when she called. Her husband Preston, a man who had spent 2 decades quietly excusing her behavior, sat her down one evening in their living room and said, "Brenna, I love you, but I have watched you treat people like they were beneath you for a long time, and I cannot pretend anymore that I did not know." Preston did not leave her, but something in their marriage went cold that night and never fully warmed again. Her job at a mid-sized publishing firm ended 9 months after the video. They cited restructuring. Everyone knew it was not restructuring. She was quietly walked out of the building by a woman from Human Resources who would not meet her eyes. She applied for 147 positions over the next 14 months. She got 7 interviews. She got 0 offers. At 48 years old, Brenna Whitlock was learning something her whole life had never taught her. The world remembered. And when you spent decades treating people like they did not matter, the world eventually stopped pretending you did. She saw the ad for the Voss Marketing Career Pivot Internship Program on a Wednesday evening. It was designed for older professionals restarting their careers after long gaps. She read it 3 times. She almost did not apply, but she was out of options. She sent in her application on a Thursday morning and got a call for an interview on a Monday afternoon. The interview was conducted by a mid-level human resources manager who did not recognize her name. She performed well. She was invited to join the incoming class of career pivot interns starting the following month. She cried in her car after that call. She thought her life was beginning again. She had no idea whose desk she was walking toward. Here is what nobody in Brenna Whitlock's life had bothered to tell her. The senior marketing executive who ran the career pivot internship program at Voss Marketing was a 32-year-old woman named Mae Tatum. She had joined the firm 18 months earlier. She had been promoted twice in the last year. She had a corner office on the 22nd floor with a view of the Dallas skyline, and, on her desk, a single-framed photograph of a black family standing in front of a small wooden ranch house on the Texas prairie in 1898. Everly reviewed the incoming intern files 2 weeks before the start date, as she always did. She opened the 4th file. She saw the name Brenna Whitlock. She saw the photograph clipped to the top corner. She sat very still in her chair for a long moment. Then she closed the file. She stood up. She walked to her office window. She looked out at the city skyline for a while. And she called her grandmother Othelia in Prairie View. She said, "Grandma, I need to tell you something." Othelia listened to the whole story. When Everly was done, the 78-year-old woman on the other end of the line was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Baby, what are you going to do?" Everly said, "I don't know. Part of me wants to reject the file." Othelia said, "And what does the rest of you want?" Everly said, "The rest of me wants to be exactly who you raised me to be." Othelia said, "Then that is what you are going to do. You are not going to humiliate her. You are not going to punish her. You are going to hold her to the same standard you hold every other person who walks through that door. And you are going to let her sit with what she did. That is heavier than anything you or I could ever put on her." Everly said, "Yes, ma'am." She hung up the phone. She walked back to her desk. She reopened the file. She approved Brenna Whitlock's placement into the program. And she waited 2 weeks. Which brings us back to that Monday morning. Brenna Whitlock sat in the glass conference room on the 22nd floor of Voss Marketing wearing her best pressed blouse, holding her onboarding folder in her lap, telling herself this was her second chance. The door opened. Mae Tatum walked in. She set the coffee cup down. She set the folder down. She sat behind the desk. And when she looked at Brenna, she said the words that would live in Brenna Whitlock's memory for the rest of her life. She said, "I hope you like the coffee here. I made it myself for years. But this time, dear listener, you know what those words carry. You know the video. You know the 2 lost years. You know the grandmother in Prairie View who taught Everly that the deepest justice is not revenge. It is standing in front of the person who tried to break you and choosing, deliberately, not to become them." Brenna's hands began to tremble. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Everly did not enjoy it. She did not smile again. She simply folded her hands on the desk and continued. She said, "Mrs. Whitlock, you are here because you applied to this program and you were accepted on merit. That has not changed. You will be treated exactly like every other intern in this class. You will be held to the same standards. You will be given the same opportunities. You will report to the same team leads. And you will be evaluated on the same performance metrics. If you succeed here, you succeed on your own work. If you struggle, you will struggle the same way anyone else does. I am not going to fire you. I am not going to expose you. I am not going to tell anyone in this building who you were before you walked through that door. That is not my job. My job is to run this program fairly. And I will." She paused. Then she said, "But I need you to know one thing before we begin. I remember every second of that morning. I remember the sound of your voice. I remember what the coffee felt like on my skin. I remember standing in the back room afterward and thinking about my grandmother in Prairie View, Texas, and the code she raised me on. That code is the only reason you are sitting in this chair right now instead of at home wondering why another door closed. So I want you to work hard, Mrs. Whitlock. I want you to earn every single thing you get here. And when this internship is over, whatever comes next, I want you to remember whose grace you were sitting in." Brenna Whitlock did not speak. She could not. She simply nodded once and lowered her eyes. Everly stood up. She walked to the door. She turned back one last time and said, "The orientation begins in 10 minutes. I will see you all in the training room." Then she left. The 3 months of Brenna Whitlock's internship at Voss Marketing were the hardest 3 months of her professional life. Not because Everly was unfair. She was scrupulously fair. Not because the other interns treated Brenna badly. They did not know who she was. It was hard because for the first time in her adult life, Brenna Whitlock had to sit inside a room where the woman with all the power over her future was the same woman she had once tried to destroy, and she had to prove herself every single day knowing that woman owed her nothing. Brenna worked harder in those 3 months than she had worked in the previous 20 years combined. She stayed late. She asked questions. She apologized when she made mistakes, and she began to mean it in a way she never had before. Something in her began to change. Not because she wanted a job at the end of it, though she did. Because for the first time, she was being held to a standard by a person she could not charm, intimidate, or dismiss. At the end of the program, Brenna was offered a full-time entry-level position on one of Voss Marketing's smaller accounts. She accepted it. On her last day of the internship, before she left the 22nd floor for the day, she stopped at Everly's office door. She knocked softly. Everly looked up from her desk. Brenna said, "May I say one thing to you before I go?" Everly said, "You may." Brenna's voice was quiet. She said, "I have spent 3 months trying to think of the right way to apologize to you. I do not think there is a right way. I do not think an apology fixes what I did. But I want you to know that I have thought about that morning every single day for 3 years. And meeting you again in this office was not the punishment I thought it was going to be. It was the mirror I needed. Thank you for holding it up. Thank you for the grace I did not earn." Everly listened without interrupting. When Brenna was done, Everly said, "Mrs. Whitlock, I did not do this for you. I did this because of who my grandmother raised me to be. But I appreciate you saying it. Go do good work." Brenna nodded. She turned. She walked to the elevator. 3 weeks after Brenna's internship ended, Everly flew home to Prairie View for a weekend. She sat with her grandmother Othelia on the front porch of the Tatum Ranch, watching the Texas sun sink behind the pasture land. The old wooden porch creaked beneath their chairs. The live oak tree where 5 generations of Tatums were buried stood still in the golden evening light. Othelia said, "So, how did it end, baby?" Everly said, "She apologized. She thanked me. She meant it, I think." Othelia said, "And how do you feel?" Everly thought about it for a long moment. She looked out at the land her great-great-grandfather Ezekiel had claimed with his bare hands in 1885. She looked at the fence lines her father had mended. She looked at the same red dirt her mother had planted a garden in the year Everly was born. She said, "I feel like I finally understood what you always meant. You said the deepest justice is not revenge. You said it is outliving somebody's worst day. I did not fully know what that meant until I watched her sit in that chair." Othelia reached over and took Everly's hand. She said, "That is right, baby. You did not beat her. You outlived her worst day. That is what we have always done." Here is the thing about the people who mistake your quiet for weakness. They forget that quiet is not surrender. Sometimes quiet is a young woman wiping foam off her face and going back to work. Sometimes quiet is a grandmother on a porch reminding her granddaughter of a code 5 generations old. And sometimes quiet is a black executive in a tailored suit sliding a coffee cup across a desk toward the woman who once threw a drink in her face and saying, without raising her voice, that grace is stronger than every camera ever built. Some people spend their lives trying to bury the people they think are beneath them. They forget that certain people were raised by families who know exactly how to grow things from hard ground. If you stayed until the end, thank you. More stories from Breach and Balance are already on your screen. Click one now. And if you have not subscribed yet, do not miss what is coming next. See you there.